The following podcast may include coarse language, graphic content, and politically and/or religiously sensitive material. Those of you who are offended by such content should fuck off.
Welcome to the Daemoneye podcast, episode 12. That's 12 in German, not a call for the werewolf apocalypse. The podcast where we discuss tabletop and electronic gaming, science fiction and fantasy materials, actual science and technology, geek culture, and why Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead, is sitting at my feet barking.
You already did something like that.
Yes, I know. Today's topic is technology systems and their depiction in gaming. Hi, I'm Jay Burrell, author of the company's gaming materials and kidnapping victim. Please, somebody rescue me. He makes me eat people and drink Chianti.
You enjoy that part. This is Tristan Eifler, the business side of the company and writer.
I promise I'll be
good. All right. You'll have to bear with us this podcast. It's going to be a little more off the cuff than usual, which is saying something. But we do have something of a format and something of a organization going here. So let's go ahead and dive right into brass tacks. I'm not sure if that's the right use of the phrase. So let's begin with the formalities. Tyler, how are you doing this lovely, lovely day and all the previous days before up until the last podcast?
I want to murder the world.
Oh, I love that. That's my second favorite Skrillex song.
People suck.
Yes, they do. Would you care to elaborate?
If I'm lucky.
By elaborate, I mean... It hit me just as I was saying that, yeah. So I understand you had a little bike issue?
Yeah, I grew up not exactly on the right side of the tracks, so I was always running out of everything. So these days, I pathologically keep a spare of everything. If I have a bike, I have a spare bike. If I have a computer, I have a spare computer. That's essentially how I roll. Well, my spare bike a little while ago got stolen. I managed to get it back, but the people who stole it just completely fucked up everything. Sorry, not my spare bike, my primary bike. So I've been having to ride my spare bike until I can get my primary bike fixed. And honestly, looking at the price of it, I'm looking at replacing it. Well, today, my spare bike, the tire on it blew out. So now I am bikeless.
Bikeless in Seattle, or bikeless in
Sacramento.
North Highlands.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand you had to walk a fair distance over the bike store or something, and it was closed.
Yeah, the bike store over that's closest to me closes at 4 o'clock, and it's about 4 miles away, so I basically bike there. So whenever I have a problem with one of my bikes, I need to get a tire replaced or something like that, I just pull it off the bike, put it on or in my backpack, bike over there, get it fixed, bike back, reassemble everything. Well, I can't really do that without a functioning bike.
You need a bike to get a bike. Well, anything beyond that, anything else horrible go wrong in your life recently?
Just minor things that, kind of pile up to conspire to keep you from getting shit done that you want to get done.
I know precisely what you're talking about oh so very well, yeah. For me, the week has been basically a collection of petty grievances compounded by occasional lack of sleep due to insomnia or just being too apathetic to go to bed. My current job, my day job my boss is in research mode and he gets a little frantic and he becomes this whirlpool of lots of little tasks which he forgets some or he just forgets he already assigned you 12. He wants to do one more thing, blah, blah, blah. I say this out loud because I very doubt he'll ever hear this. Long story short, it's been very mentally taxing and once again, I haven't been able to get much shit done, not just side projects, but things like exercise and cooking and going out, to do shit beyond staring at my computer all day long. It's trying to break out of a rut I've been stuck in for a while, but this Yeah, it's been difficult. It's not quite as shitty as your, I think, though.
Yeah.
So that's been my lot.
All right. So now that we've confirmed that we've both had or have been having shitty times.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's the status of all the Daemoneye stuff? That's what all our listeners want to hear about. When will the new book be out?
Well, as far as Dragonfire goes, I have no freaking clue. I've been able to, over the past month, get about 2 hours worth of work done on it, and it needs about I would say, 50 hours of work to be finished. So, your guess is as good as mine. Barring that, though, I've more or less finished the whole Varadice thing. It's now down to the point where you just need to add monsters. I've been working on Heroes of Horror, which is a alteration for the D20 style D&D rule set that makes it more horror themed as opposed to just like running gun through dungeons themed. I've run a couple of games with it with my local group, and they've been really, really fucking enjoying it. And it's awesome part about it is it's essentially the size of a pamphlet. I think a couple of pieces of art and maybe another 10 hours or so worth of actual writing work on it, we could probably produce it as like a $5 PDF.
That's not a bad idea. So, another little mini product finally coming up. We can finally add something more to the Daemoneye publishing store. Speaking of adding more stuff to the store, well, actually, I don't have much. Probably won't have much to add. More about that later. But as far as my stuff goes, I've managed to keep writing on the little side stories to the Lycanthrope Club. Old Wounds seems to be going well. Beyond that, though, not much creative-wise for me or business-wise. As I said, I've been mentally exhausted these last couple weeks, and I have been for a while. That might change soon enough. Not going to say why, but I'll just leave it at that. So that kind of covers the business side here. Now we'll move on to a new topic, questions and answers. So I went on my DeviantArt page where I get a fair amount of traffic, most of the traffic these days, and I asked people to ask either myself or Tyler questions. I waited for weeks and weeks, and we got a grand total of 3 questions, Tyler.
Wow.
The cup runneth over.
We have such a huge following.
I know. Move over, PewDiePie. Ugh. Even saying his name makes me grimace. Well, in any case, let's answer them. 2 of them are general, so they're for either one of us, and one of them is just for me, so let's start with the general one. Ahem. Do you play any or watch any indie games? Paraphrased from Mnos. Tyler, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. There's a couple that I follow. But mostly, I've been really disappointed between the promises of what they'll deliver and what they actually deliver. However, there are some notable exceptions. The one that's basically got me totally schwanging is Darkest Dungeon. I think that's I know it's a little bit of old news. It's been out for half a year or so now, but I'm still rocking that. I'm loving just the whole Cthulhu horror theme to it. The weird ass magic items and everything, the lore behind it. It's one of the games that promised X and delivered X plus 2.
I also play it. I played it. I don't play it much anymore. I enjoyed it, though my tolerance for it is limited. So, but here's a question which will gauge just how much a fan you are. Have you beaten the game on Abyssal?
Oh hell no! I've barely managed to make it through one quest through one level of the actual ancestral home. I've managed to make it through one quest there, and then I die in the 3rd or 4th room on the second quest. Just
on the regular mode. Well, I've beaten the regular game.
TPK. I'm loving the game, but I'll be the first to admit, I'm probably not the best at it. Either that or I have really shitty luck.
Well, it's all about luck, but it's also all about rolling the dice over and over. That's the grind portion. It's part of the reason my interest kind of waned. I managed to beat the game on regular mode, although I did, cheat a little. And by cheat, I mean I looked in the wiki, I looked up strategies, so I kind of knew it was coming. But if you say, but you pretty much have to do the same thing for games like, say, Dark Soul, and this is the challenge on this is certainly Dark Soul-esque, although it relies, I think, too much on luck than actual skill. A little pet peeve of mine, but okay. So Darkest Dungeon, that's one. Anything else?
After Darkest Dungeon, indie games that I'm into. I can't remember the name of it, but there's this zombie apocalypse game where it's like a three-quarters...
that really narrows it.
Three-quarters isometric view, it's a roguelike, randomly designed cities and everything, and you have to manage a survivors colony as the apocalypse progresses. I don't know if it's out yet, but it's definitely on my wish list. I can't remember the name of it, though. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Is it State of Decay?
That's it. Thank you.
I think that's the beta has been out for a while, actually.
It has been?
I don't know. I haven't. Maybe I'm thinking of a different game, but I think I've seen it on Steam.
I have it on my Steam wish list, and it hasn't popped up as available. I'll have to go look at it. Maybe I just missed the email or something.
All right. Well, okay. So, horrible Lovecraftian horror and zombie apocalypse. That's the dual pillars of a lot of indie gaming. That and small child in a horrible situation he doesn't understand.
He has the big-headed kid in a dark world shtick.
Yeah. All right. And as for me, we already mentioned I did play Darkest Dungeon. Didn't enjoy it quite as much as Tyler did, although it was a nice diversion, albeit a occasionally infuriating one. Beyond that, I haven't played a lot of games recently because I'm very picky about the games I play, and unfortunately, this is a terrible habit on my part. When there's a game I am interested in, sometimes I wind up watching Let's Plays, then it kind of spoils it for me because I feel like, I already know half the story, so why should I buy the game now? Which is very shitty of me, but there you go. But two games which kind of stand out. First of one, Stardew Valley. It's basically just Harvest Moon made by an American, but it was enjoyable while I played it. Beyond that, I also played a game which had kind of a sad ending, but was enjoyable in its time. Clockwork Empires, kind of a building steampunk game with strong Cthulhian mythos themes.
Yeah, I heard about that, but I couldn't remember the actual name of the game. I've seriously been interested in checking that one out.
Well, it's complete, but the problem is that the developer Gaslight Games, it looks like it kind of imploded towards the end. I mean, I was following it for a while. I was playing it off and on as new stuff came and went. The alpha was very unstable. I was playing very early on, but in any case, they kind of reached a point where a lot of the stuff they promised, or the first phase, the stuff they promised they got into the game and was stabilized. There was a shit ton more they wanted to add, like electricity, like pipes for like automatic production, but they issued kind of a final version, and then suddenly apparently the company Gaslight Games just kind of went bust, and that's the end of it. It's still available, but they're not gonna. I don't think it's gonna improve much. So there you have it.
That blows. I hate it when promising projects, basically because of circumstance, end up going vaporware on you.
Well, it's not vaporware. I mean, maybe the company's still around. I know the game is still available to purchase on Steam. It's just, I don't know what the situation is. I kind of looked into it, but it seemed kind of murky, and my interest had waned by then. So we can just leave it at that.
Okay.
All right. Good question. Good answers. All right. So now for a rather vague one. I'm not even sure it was directed as a question to us, but I'll take it anyways. Can you give a list of certain projects you have considered and are working on? So we kind of already covered that previously, but this is from Ganondorf79. So we talked about stuff that's in production. Let's just focus on the side of the question which asks, what things have we considered or are considering doing?
Oh, so the stuff that isn't on our front plate, but like back burner style things.
Or ideas we've had which might someday come to fruition.
Okay, well, let's see here. In terms of the Universal Decay system, Ganondorf, there is the Cape and Hammer gritty superhero setting. There is the Shadows Move modern day gothic horror setting. I like to describe it as Ghostbusters in the world of Buffy the Vampire Slayer if it was all written by H.P. Lovecraft. Let's see here. There's Steam Cities, which is one of my personal favorites. It's a psionics heavy steampunk world with flying cities that have to use essentially client state or slave state or farms and mines and stuff that are on the surface in order to survive. Because let's face it, if your city is flying around, it isn't like you're going to have a farm attached to it. There's see here. Spears to Stars, which is a conglomeration of all of the technology systems, which fits the theme of today's podcast, that are used in Universal Decay. And there's Walking the Black, which is the setting expansion, including star maps for the Dead Stars setting that's written into the Universal Decay core rulebook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as for me, there's always a bunch of stories and projects I'd like to work on. It's already kind of in progress already, so I'm not sure it counts, but I'd like to continue the Mythanthrope series. I'd also like to try to turn the Mythanthrope universe into some sort of adaptation for role-playing or something else. I think it's a cool concept. I also would like to adapt the Universal Decay system for the Lycanthrope Club. I actually have that on the back burner. There's some notes I have here, but I never quite get around to finishing it. Let's see. Beyond that, I would also eventually like to make a video game. I mean, we're kind of took the first preliminary steps on this. The Verdice system we want to adapt to a game. We'll see what happens with that, but there are a bunch of little concepts I'm toying around with. Nothing, but there is one thing I've been wanting to work on for a while, which is either a story or a game setting or a game system, which focuses on alternate dimensions and dimensional travel. Because the closest, I think there are a couple of role playing games which have that as a central focus. There was a D&D setting, Planescape, though that was kind of into a punk fantasy. Still one of my favorite settings in old D&D. I think there were Rifts was also kind of played with that. But the game system is a pain in the ass to work with, but I try to like a story which deals with those concepts and try to do it a little more. Focus on the grand scale of interdimensional travel and also a lot of focus on culture clashes. High tech versus low tech, fantasy versus sci-fi. I've always kind of liked that mixing, but also have kind of a unifying central theme of grand scale and kind of explore some philosophical questions regarding, if this could happen, what's, and metaphysical implications. So that's one thing I've been kind of thinking about recently, but haven't really even gotten anything down on paper yet. Speaking of
D&D, there's the Edition Pi system that we've been working on, which is a free version of the main rule books that fixes a lot of the bugs and errors that were originally incorporated into the 3.0 and 3.5 system. Hence, Edition Pi 3.14 yada yada yada. The one thing that I should point out with it though is that while the PDFs of the rulebooks are available on our website, they haven't been updated in a long ass time. We should probably fix that.
Yeah, you should go ahead and email me the latest versions. I think I actually already have them, but just in case, sent to my Gmail account. So we might see that very soon. So you heard there is basically a free, totally legal version of D&D 3rd edition, a full role-playing game available for download on our website. Seriously, why are you still listening? Download it if you haven't already. It's pretty awesome.
There's but using the Edition Pi rules, one of the things that I've been using for the Psionics playtest is the old Dark Sun campaign. We have an in-house conversion for the Dark Sun campaign using the Edition Pi rule set, and I would love to be able to distribute it to people, even if it was for free, except that it uses copyrighted material that we don't own the copyright for, ergo I can't actually release it to anybody, and it has to be kept in-house, which massively sucks because the only treatment that Dark Sun has gotten in years has been a really crappy splat book for the Pathfinder D&D variant system. I mean, it was bad. It was really, really bad, dude. Let's see here. But also going into Edition Pi, there is the after the Mind Wars setting that we use that that we're going to be making into a Heroes of Horror games here shortly. The after the Mind Wars setting, the idea is that the subterranean psionic races finally did the deed and attacked the surface races full on invasion. The surface kingdoms retaliated, destroying huge sections of the Underdark, which forced all the Underdark monsters to basically get pushed out like a toothpaste bottle style into the cities, destroying the cities. And you are built with the elite array, and you have player class levels, and you start off at like level 3, and you're off in the boonies and bumfuck not worth invading a stan, a small town that is swollen from its original population of 1,000 to 10,000 with refugees from all over the planet, and you're the last known center of civilization left. Try and survive.
It's a lot of fun, although it can be a little repetitive in the beginning, we found.
Yeah. There's also the various cans systems, like can of whoop-ass, warning point contents away from face when opening. Yes, all of the various cans have humorous little subtitle vignettes that are focused on different character types for the Edition Pi system. Can of whoop-ass obviously is for, fighter or warrior types. There's also a can of Dragonfire, which is not Dragonfire, but a can of Dragon Juice, which is designed for arcane spellcaster types. There's a can of Sacred Oil for more faith priest-oriented types. Can of Slimy Goodness. I love the vignette for that. It's danger. Imbibing this beverage can lead to a career in law or politics.
Yeah, kind of reminiscent of the old, the D&D 3rd edition class books, or the old 2nd edition complete bard, complete so-and-so, complete class booklets, you might say. Yeah. Yeah,
those were the inspiration for the actual runs, but the contents for them are, wildly different. Oh, speaking of technologies that you were talking about earlier, the Heroes of Horror book are going to have rules for D&D style technology all the way up to the modern era.
Ooh, we'll get more into that a little bit later, perhaps, because we still have one more question, which is directed to me from a Mr. Sy, or spelled S-Y, and it's one I've heard off and on, and when I dread answering, but I should probably answer it again. When will the Lycanthrope Club Book 3 be done? And at this point, I'm just going to have to resort to the old R.R. Martin response. It'll be done when it's done. It's a massive undertaking. It is basically a murder mystery, and anyone who's written anything or written novel knows that the longest and most arduous books to write are mysteries and crime novellas, because it kind of is that one. I haven't made a lot of progress on it. It's one of those projects every so often I kind of open the Word file, make a few adjustments, consider what has to be done, and then I kind of get scared off by the sheer scale, and because I've realized I've been sitting there for an hour trying to work it out. I do have an outline for the revamped plots completed, so I kind of know where it's going. Not entirely, though, because like many other authors, if I completely plan out a story, even if it's just a revision of one, I tend to lose interest in it very quickly. So I found it's always best when I write to kind of, in part, make it up as I go along, at least some of the details. Sorry, I'll keep writing little side stories and little novellas set in the universe as I keep going on this, but at this point it's just going glacially slow, and nothing else I can say but I'm sorry and I'm working on it. So that's my long, drawn-out, pathetic little answer. All right. And that concludes the Q&A section. Hopefully we'll have more than 3 next time. And provide questions, swine.
Ask us anything. We might even incriminate ourselves.
Yeah. Anyway, so That little aside done, let's go on and move on to the actual topic of the podcast, technology systems in games. This was prompted by you, Tyler, so I'll go ahead and let you start. I will, however, kind of nudge you towards a starting theme or starting side of this, which is the role of technology systems in role-playing games and other games. Go.
Well, I think first we have to categorize technology systems because we want to make sure that we're actually talking about the same thing when we're talking about a technology system. It seems to me that technology systems start off at the lowest end of mutability with the shopping list or the like encyclopedia system, where you can buy gun X, you can buy gun Y. Here are the stats for gun X, the stats for gun Y, and what you buy is what you get. You're not really going to be changing jack nor shit. That seems to be like the lowest level of technology system, where you have a game that might end up with like 50 bazillion guns, but they were each individually written into the game's database by the developer. Then up above that, you have the alterable systems. Stuff like you can buy a gun and then put scope X or scope Y on it, or you can like modify the gun in order to increase fire rate. Stuff where you start off with a already developed item that you can then tweak a little bit with mods and add-ons. But you're still stuck with that already developed item and with the mods and add-ons that are provided to you. A good example of that would be the weapon system in Hellscape London, if you can even find a copy of Hellscape London today.
Good luck.
Yeah. Then there are another good example of that people are probably more familiar with are weapons and items from Diablo, where you can slot in runes and gems into them to alter their statistics, but you still need the base item to be the base item.
Yeah, that's kind of a stretch as far as technology goes, I would argue, Tyler.
Well, think about it. How is that any different than, or how is, like, say, a sword with a rune of fire that makes it so that hits deal extra fire damage any different from or better yet, a bow with a rune of fire so that your shots do extra fire damage? How is that any different than a AK-47 with incendiary rounds?
Well, one is grounded in the laws of physics, but I think we've already done a technology versus magic style podcast, so let's just proceed along.
My point is that they're both a type of technology. Then you go into the full mutability, where you basically just give the rules for making items, and then let players run wild with it. A good example of that is the magic item creation system that people are familiar with. The magic item creation system in D&D that allows you to slot spells into a bazillion different variety of whatever the hell you want to slot them into. There's also that's also the system that we use for all the technologies, or the concept we use for all the technologies in Universal Decay. Only we go a step further in the Universal Decay system and provide a master list of examples so that you don't have to you don't have to learn and master the technology system right off the gate. You can just pull an example off a table and run.
Well, I mean, there's even a dimension beyond that, which is also in Universal Decay and in several other games, such as GURPS, which is technology level. The relative advancement and the options available.
Yeah.
And what I think you're kind of leading to the main point here is that what the technology system does overall for a role-playing game is give a lot of options. That's one of the major points. It gives a lot of mutability. And something like D&D, in the base system, you have a variety of weapons. You maybe have a masterwork and magical weapons, but that's kind of it. With Universal Decay and GURPS, for example, you have a ridiculous range, not only in like the medieval setting, but also options that extend beyond in the space and sci-fi and even ultra tech levels. I mean, GURPS vehicles, Tyler.
Oh yeah, GURPS vehicles was just freaking insane.
Or even in a setting where where there's more or less a fixed technology level, Shadowrun, Hacker or Decker 2.0, where I believe there were actually logarithms used in some of the rules for determining like deck power.
They're very close to it. It got in the Decker 2.0 book got insane. It got to the point where I had to write a program to actually do all the calculations for me when I was playing Shadowrun.
So that kind of demonstrates kind of the other side. Too few options in your technology system. It's limiting. I mean, it can work for certain games like D&D, I suppose, if you want to focus on other parts. But if you go the other way and offer too many options, and even worse yet, make a lot of these options or a lot of these rules necessary just to play the game, it can kind of make it difficult to play. I mean, if you're running a PC game, that's usually okay then, because the PC takes care of a lot of it. Although, if you still, not necessarily, because remember, was it Cyber Shock? No, what's it? System Shock. The original System Shock. It was PC game, but the rules for making your character and level advancement was so excruciating, it was hard to play.
I didn't really get into System Shock, though.
Well, I've seen some Let's Plays, and I've heard people speak of it, so I mean, that's the point I would like to make. You have... Options are good, but if you make the option technology systems are good, but you have to make it so that it's either modular and optional, and it can do with or without, so you can only use as much as you want, and the rules that are there are cohesive and kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily easy to understand is necessary. It's nice, but at least once you got them, there's a logic and there's kind of a system to them.
Yeah, you have to make sure that everything that you do is consistent from A to B, because the lack of consistency is what destroys most most technology systems.
And I mean, there's also a matter of balancing too.
Yeah, that can be really difficult.
Because as you add more and more options, more and more kind of notches, more and more moving parts to your technology system, you open up the possibility for abuse. I mean, you see it in PC gaming, we see it in role-playing game. That's why playtesting, sometimes that's like 90% of the playtesting once a lot of the bugs are out of the way, just looking for abuses in the system.
Yeah, that's why. That's why the first playtest that I always do when I'm testing out a new splat book or a new material is I'll always do a playtest to the core rules, like with the Heroes of Horror game that we're doing. None of the splat books are allowed. It's just the main 3 rule books and the Heroes of Horror pamphlet, and then I'm testing it to make sure that it all balances against the material in the main 3 rule books. That way, I can at least use the main 3 rule books as the base balancing point for everything else. As long as it all references that standard and is balanced to that standard, I know that there aren't going to be that many times that there aren't going to be like times where people can find an exploit by mixing book A with book B and a little bit of book C.
So, but then again, so we keep ragging on how much work and how carefully you have to do with all these options and technology systems if it's too complex. But at the same time, I mean, that's, for a lot of games, that's what makes the game. That's what makes Universal Decay. And for people who play GURPS, that's what makes GURPS, the options. So, that it does enrich your game. It does lead to a lot of different options. I think that works as long as the game is kind of centered around that or is driven by it. In D&D, it's all about, classic D&D, it's all about medieval fantasy. So beyond the spell systems, there's really not a really heavy need for a technological variety there. There's not really, the options are there, but they're usually in a splat book or in the back of the book.
That's true.
So it's that, in that case, it's served by it. But for a game like GURPS or for Universal Decay, where it's all about options, it's about technology, almost about complexity, I would say, then it kind of drives the book, it drives the game.
Yeah, I would say you're right on that score.
That's kind of an important design concept when you design a role-playing game or game. I mean, are these options necessary? Is it a gimmick? Does it provide more gameplay? Does it provide more options? Or, like I said, is it just a gimmick? It doesn't really make things more complex, not really making the game much more fun. Do players even bother using it? Like in the old love RPGs, do players even bother using techniques which inflict poison or paralysis on their opponents when only like 1 out of 1,000 of your enemies are even vulnerable to it?
Yeah. You don't want a game where you use technology to give people options, and the options either are massively overpowered or massively underpowered. You have to find a balance point.
The devils are in the details, and so I think we're all in agreement on this.
Definitely.
Hooray. All right. So is there anything else on your list there, Tyler, which you want to add before I add a few more of mine?
Let's see here. Stuff that's in development. We've already I already went over the Universal Decay stuff that's kind of on the back burner. As far as the Edition Pi stuff that's on the back burner, let's see here. We did After the Mind Wars. We lamented the fact that we can't release the in-house Dark Sun setting. There's the various cans. There are the steampunk book that we're trying to actually get up and running. Emphasis on the trying. There's Lands of Molokai, the Molokai campaign setting. It's a medieval D&D style fantasy world where a couple of centuries ago a psionic civilization basically appeared in a seclusion on the northernmost continent in dwarven territory and as refugees. And the central conceit of the campaign setting is that there's none of the usual MacGuffins that keep people nice to each other. So there's over 20 different factions in the world, and they're all a mixture of hatred and like and whatever. And you can definitely get really into the politics with that game. There's let's see here, the Abomination Codex, which is adding horror, which is also another system for adding horror elements to a D&D game. But it doesn't instead of altering the base rules like Heroes of Horror does in order to introduce horror, the Abomination Codex just adds things like the Tome of Flesh Remade, which allows you to get, or depending upon your cipher script check, you can get random body altering powers like resurrections and stuff, but they all have a downside. And if you don't use them, you end up with charisma or wisdom penalties that don't go away until they're used. We have in the Molokai game, the Lands of Molokai game that I'm running right now on Sundays. We have one of those books, and the party cleric is the first guy who actually read the book and figured out what it was, and he ended up loading into his brain one of the resurrection spells. But if anybody here has seen Hellraiser, you know what a Cenobite is. That's the downside to using the resurrection spell. Yes, you can bring a humanoid creature back from the dead, but they come back all held up and thinking or worshiping torture. His character being lawful good definitely doesn't want to use it, and the entire overarching quest of the game is finding a way to destroy this damn book. They can't even bury it because it reappears in their backpack.
Classic cursed item behavior. Might as well call that other book the Book of... Go ahead.
It gets even better. If you die while you have the spell for resurrection loaded into your brain, you come back as a Cenobite.
I think that was pretty much implied, Tyler.
Yeah.
I was about to say, you might as well call that one book the Book of Cronenberg.
Very appropriate. Let's see here. There's the Artificer's Handbook that we discussed. That's all about artifice and has a artifice setting in it and everything, or a steampunk setting in it. Heroes of Molokai. Oh, Psionic's Ascendant. People keep on asking me when I'm going to be putting out the next version of Psionic's Ascendant, which is going to end up being all of the Psionics material that I'm playtesting in the in-house Dark Sun book, just collated all together with some art, some explanatory text, maybe a little mini setting, and then released. There's also Sanguine Lore, which is the big book of vampires and vampire hunting, including a construct a vampire system. And then there's the another side of that, which is the Under the Cover of Darkness, which sadly I have all of the art that I need for it except for one piece, and I'm not sure, but I think the artist that I was using, who happened to live in New Orleans, died in Katrina, because I have not been able to get a hold of her ever since Katrina hit.
That's too bad.
So I can't get the release signed that I need to actually publish it with the damn paper, with the damn artwork.
Shit. Well, are you thoroughly finished shilling our products?
Yeah, I think that's about it.
We kind of diverged there, so let's go back to this topic of, instead of our own systems, what are some technology systems from games that you admire or you despise? Or both?
Well, if we're going with video game systems, I really did like the Diablo 2 technology system. It was simple, but it was good for what you got. Or you could there was so I really did like it. It added a lot of variability and utility to the game, where you could like slot in different runes and stuff, and you could even like craft up new runes and gems out of old runes and gems. Honestly, when I was playing Diablo 2, that was mostly what I did. I was just going out and hunting for gems and runes.
So in a lot of, especially a lot of electronic games, a lot of technology systems kind of gets down to the crafting system. I mean, that's what technology is to a certain extent. What about the Fallout games, especially 3 and 4?
Yeah, the Fallout system for crafting is an example of the shopping list system. Yes, you could craft up a new gun, but it was always the same gun. You couldn't craft a bolt thrower that did less damage but had a higher rate of fire. No, if you made a spike thrower, something to throw railroad spikes, it was always exactly that one device. So yes, it had a crafting system, but the crafting system was just a hidden version of a shopping list system. It just used different currency.
And the most recent Fallout game?
I haven't even bothered with the most recent one.
I heard it's a little more involved, and you can craft your own village and shit. But it's still kind of a shopping cart, shopping list system. So how would a system diverge from the shopping list system then? Because at the end of the day, it's all about gathering 10 herbs or 5 iron to make item A, which can be made to do item B.
Yeah, Fallout really missed the boat when it comes to crafting systems. They had the chance to make a truly awesome crafting system, and they just dropped it.
What do you mean?
Okay, the Fallout campaign setting is based on the conceit that everybody's having to scavenge and assemble what they need. Well, what they could have done is they could have gone with something similar to the Diablo system, where you have to add runes or add power packs to an item in order to make it function correctly. Only in this case, you want to be adding runes and gems. You'd be adding say a fusion battery instead of just using a power cell or something like that. But you would have the ability to craft the base item, and when you built the base item, you could have altered it and choose how many slots that it would have for augmentation versus how good its base stats would be. Let's say you were building one of those, or building a rail thrower or a railroad tie shooter. You could decide to reduce the ammo capacity in order to be able to add a option slot to it, and then later on you could add say a fusion battery so that your bolts gained an electric charge.
So more customization there, yeah.
But the idea would be it's a system very similar to the Diablo system, where you have the base item and then you add something that has slots in it, and you add something to the slots in order to alter the stats of the base item. But the difference being, when you crafted the base item, you would get sliders that you could use to decide what your base stats were, and you could give up some of your base stats in order to get mod slots.
So that one kind of incorporates some character creation into it as well. Not just anyone can take a bar of soap and a wood log and make a sword or something. I don't know. So I mean, you kind of see that in other systems where you have to get certain feats or skills in order to craft stuff. So that's another added dimension of complexity, where it's a trade-off between being more independent of shit you find versus being kind of a technomancer. That's I think a step above just the basic Fallout stuff for the most part. Although I think there is still a skill limiter on some of the stuff you can craft, though, to be fair, in Fallout. It's very basic, though.
Yeah, it's a tier system. You need crafting skill at X level in order to be able to build Y item.
Yeah, so maybe not as much. What are some other examples of good crafting system? I guess I just had one on the tip of my tongue, but I already forgot it. Anything you can think of?
Dead Space.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of people like it. It's a weird little aside. A lot of people like that game. Some people absolutely despise it or kind of dismiss it. I did enjoy the crafting system there, where it kind of played upon the fact that this guy is an engineer. That being said, on the third game, it got a little too. I think the options kind of went wayside there, because instead of having these set guns you could have and you could customize to improve them, you can suddenly combine all these different modules to make your own custom guns. Sounds great, right? But for some reason it never really clicked for me on the third game.
Yeah,
I always felt
that's because come the third game, they were literally going for the pay to win model.
Oh, that's another aspect of it. Yeah, we all this DLC mini shit there. That wasn't my main complaint. I didn't bother with that, but yeah, that was another unrelated problem.
It isn't something that we could influence or anything like that. It was just a blind naked money grab by the corporate office. Totally freaking wasted potential.
Yeah. Oh, there's one other kind of technology system. Again, it's a stretch called technology, but I think it's worth mentioning. Elder Scrolls Oblivion, actually, it was a little hard to get to, but it had a surprisingly complex custom spell crafting system.
I'm not familiar with it. I'll have to take your word.
Yeah, I mean, you could do things like fire damage or ice damage and fire damage over time. I made a spell called Slow Burn, which caused minor damage, but it really lasted a long time. There was, it was fairly involved, but maybe it wasn't very easily accessible. You had to really focus on being a mage player to access it, and then later on, and it wasn't. And there was a lot of exploits, I think, with that too, which sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. I think Skyrim also had kind of a custom spell system. I don't remember it very well, though. Anyway, so that's another where you can actually customize the attacks and skills. And all right, so let's move on to something else here, which just kind of came back to the idea of technology levels in games, where So this is often you see this with more broader reach or kind of broader scope games where we have a technology level. Again, we gave the example of GURPS, and of course we have technology system in Universal Decay where you start like Stone Age versus Ultra Tech. What about anachronisms when you start mixing various technology levels or various types of technologies together? Steampunk being not quite an example, but kind of getting what I'm getting into here.
Yeah, steampunk is not so much an example of anachronism as it is an example of deviant technology. The idea that you could use something like, say, Cavorite from Jules Verne in order to produce a lift, and thereby get flying juggernaut battleships. Like in there's an anime that uses that conceit recently called Princess Principal. Not a bad anime. But the anachronisms you're talking about are stuff like people in the modern day walking around with swords and shields, or walking around with laser pistols. There's actually feats and options for doing that in the Cape and Hammer setting, and it works really well. Like, for instance, if you have a character with the immortal superpower, your character can literally be thousands of years old. So if you have immortal, you have to decide what area you're from. And depending upon what technology area you're from determines what alterations to your base classes you can start with. So if you have the warrior class and you're immortal, you can say that you were born like 1,000 years ago. So you can start off with the medieval warrior tree, which unlike modern day warrior, instead of having firearms proficiency, you have shield proficiency, and you have a little bit of an expanded skill list. You lose drive, or you lose pilot because, well, there weren't any vehicles back then, but you gain things like handle animal.
Yeah. So another example is 1632, where you have Americans from the 20th century and during the 30 Years' War in Germany popping up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's think about other places where you can have kind of anachronistic technology show up. Anything involving time travel, that's a classic.
Yeah, that's like that's the stereotype one, I guess you could say. Time travel is always going to end up with end up popping anachronisms.
Yeah, another example might be alternate dimensions, where you just happen to travel to a dimension which effectively is in the medieval times. I mean, that's can argue that's almost just time travel again with a little bit of a twist. But then you can have things like what's a good recent example? What am I thinking? The name is Gates, and so the self-defense force fought. Where
I love
soldiers
that
from. So soldiers from the from modern Japan army go to stereotypical fantasy world. It would be a great anime. It is a great anime. The only downside it was written by a freaking hard right wing military nut, so nationalist nut. So that kind of shines through sometimes. Otherwise, no, it's a great example where it's not just where it really is an anachronism of not just technology levels, but technology systems clashing, magic and machetes.
Well, not just clashing. One of the characters in that anime is a elementalist style mage who discovers chemistry and actually figures out how to mix magic and chemistry technology together.
Which he applies that. One thing that's bothered me, and that kind of touches upon a topic here, is okay. So it's clear that magic works in that Gate. Magic works on Earth as well as the fantasy world. So, I mean, there are legends of it, but why doesn't anyone in Earth have it now?
That is a bit of a discrepancy.
Yeah, because I mean, we have technology, they have magic, and we have in the setting in the anime legends of magic and so forth. But the question arises: could someone from Earth learn magic, and could they cast it on Earth? I mean, it's kind of a nitpick that doesn't really affect the quality of the anime that much, but it's something to keep in mind when you start mixing and matching with anachronism, especially when you introduce things like magic or psionics. How does it work? Is there a basis? Is there conflict, as in Arcanum, where magic and technology are kind of mutually exclusive, or is there some sort of logic behind it where they can be merged?
Yeah, Arcanum was the technology system in Arcanum of magic of magic and technology obscure or something like that. It's
Magic and Steamworks.
That's it.
I think
it's an old game, but it's still a great one. I mean, admittedly, it uses the shopping list system for especially for crafting and everything. But given that the game was 30 years old, you can give it a few.
It's not that old, Tyler. It's not that old. It was from the 2000s, I think.
It predates that, I believe.
No, I have. Well, let's not get into that. But the point is that in that system, they describe magic as twisting the laws of physics, whereas technology uses the laws of physics, which is why they're in conflict. Because whenever someone tries to use, say, a radio in the presence of magic, when the magic is working, it has to twist the laws of physics, and suddenly the radio piezoelectric piece doesn't work because it's vibrating the wrong way, because suddenly the one universal constant has gone slightly askew.
Yeah, but that's the conceit of that game.
Mm-hmm. At least it's a conceit. Again, in the Gates, that's magic. Why is magic work for them in our world? And it works the same thing, just the same way in our world as it does in theirs. And if that's the case, well, why haven't we developed magic if magic is possible in our world? Maybe does a gate provide the source of the energy? They never touch upon that, but it would be a good way to solve it right there.
Well, one of the playtest settings that I was using, for those of you who don't know, when we're writing a book, there's a bunch of settings that we use that are custom designed just to playtest elements of the book. Well, one of the settings that we were writing for Dragonfire is rules for incorporating Dragonfire or the magic and everything into a higher technology setting, such as modern day or even futuristic. So what I did was I wrote a setting called Wherein. The idea being that because of a massive magical snafu on a planet literally on the other side of the galaxy, a gate that was used to open a portal to a realm of demons in order to win their version of World War II, are accidentally connected to the to the Large Hadron Collider over in Europe and caused a permanent rupture between our two worlds, allowing the demons that were summoned, half of them flowed into that world and half of them flowed into ours. And we quickly found out that demons were very bullet soluble. So we went back through that gate and essentially, over the course of the next few years, helped the fantasy world win its version of World War II, because the alternative was letting this fantasy world fall into the clutches of an evil necromantic asshole, and then have a permanent connection to evil necromantic asshole world in the middle of Europe. Mm-hmm. So over time, we discover that. We figure out the underlying fundamental theory of magic, which has to do with the interfacing, or with a interface for zero point energy and the Higgs field that allows people to manipulate the amount of energy that's in the Higgs field in order to fold and twist it. So, like, let's say you're creating a fireball. You're not actually creating a fireball. What you're doing is you're condensing thermal energy from a large area into a small area in the Higgs field, and essentially creating a gravitic singularity that's holding on to that thermal energy, but is in itself extremely unstable. So when you then throw that blast of fire, as soon as it comes into contact with pretty much anything, the field that you created decoheres and releases the thermal energy that you built up into it that was created from conversion of 0 point energy. The conceit is that there's the inhabitants of this fantasy world the fantasy world has an extremely high content of certain rare earths that the people with their biology in that fantasy world have adopted and incorporated into their cellular structure, and essentially just due to an evolutionary accident, they've developed an organelle that allows them to access that magical system. So we then in our world use the fact of use that discovery to create things like computer chips that are capable of the same process. So you can literally code spells.
You stole that bit from the laundry files, didn't you?
Oh, I'm currently reading the latest book.
Yes, the 0 point energy and nanites. The magic handwave of sci-fi authors.
Except it's not nanites.
I know, but I always mention nanites because those are the two. 0 point energy and nanites. Whenever you want to explain anything that's basically magic, you throw that one in. My personal explanation for magic is always it's the intrusion of an alternate dimension upon our own, wherein the laws of physics vary somewhat. So that's my usual standby.
Yeah, that's a good one. I use that in one of the playtest settings that we use, the Aegis setting.
Mm-hmm. All right, so there's one other topic on technology systems here, which I want to get into, which is kind of like a bit like anachronism, but it's more like alternative tech. So, well, let me put it this way: in Fallout, it is kind of a pseudo-technological, pseudo-scientific system where there are certain aspects of physics which would never work in our world, but it's somewhat justified. But my point I'm trying to get at is that they don't really, despite having these, fusion reactors in their cars, they still seem to use vacuum tubes as transistors in their electronics. So. Yeah.
I think that's called what the hell is the term for that? It's called something like a retro future.
So the basic idea is that you can have these settings where they might have an extremely advanced understanding of physics, astronomy, or extremely advanced understanding of mathematics, yet they still and maybe extremely good understanding of, say, metallurgy, but they still use a horse to get around, or maybe they haven't developed something as simple as, say, my brain is fried right here, so I can't think of a good example. You know what I'm getting at here, where there are inconsistencies or strange deviations in how their technological progress of the society in question went. I mean, I think there's a novel, I forget which one it was, wherein in this universe, the secret to anti-gravity is so simple that most spacefaring cultures discover it by the time they reach their equivalent of the Renaissance. But by some quirk, Earth never developed it. So what we have this group of aliens invading us with these anti-gravity ships, but they happen to be armed with muskets and fire and cannons. I can't guess how that word goes. I forget the name of it though. That's kind of an extreme, silly example, but you can kind of get where I'm going with this.
Yeah, there's actually a setting book a book series that I read a little while ago. I can't remember the name of the first one, but one of the book's names is Tiona, Tiona. I figure that's rare enough that people will be able to figure out what the damn book is. Anyways, what the caveat for the setting or of the book, the main character is named Zaz, I believe is the guy's name. He's on the spectrum. He definitely has some form of Asperger's, but he comes up with like new technologies and technology systems just off the top of his head. And in the first book, he more or less accidentally figures out how to develop cold fusion. So he ends up getting kidnapped by mobsters. And the mobsters take him and his family, and they lock them up in essentially the laundry room, while they're discussing what to do with him in order to get the patent out of him. Now that he's applied for the patent, because let's face it, cold fusion, that's money in the bank. The thing is, though, they put a guy who's who's a physics and engineering genius in the laundry room, and they don't expect him to be able to kick their asses in half an hour.
He just built, the old gadgetarian trope where he builds a ray gun using a bunch of gears, some string, and a piece of gum. Yeah, but also known as MacGyvering. Yeah.
The thing I actually like about the book is, other than even with the oddball technologies such as cold fusion, they come up with plausible reasons for why it would work. In this particular case, it's a cavitic harmonization. It's one of the theories behind why cold fusion, or that we're using to try and develop cold fusion. The book basically uses that as the underlying theory for why his cold fusion device work. But other than the speculative science, everything, or the one or two things that he comes up with in each book, everything else is hardcore. This is the way this shit works stuff, and I love it.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue to justification as to why you have this kind of inconsistent or unusual series of technological advances. So one might be in the system or setting, there's a lack of some critical material, like maybe there's little or no oil on this planet. Or maybe if you want to go into more, maybe there's some, we gave an example in the Mir Aurorum setting where there's a presence of some exotic matter or rare earth minerals which allows technology to advance. So environmental factors. And there could also be a situation where there are societal or cultural pressures which suddenly come to the fore, which discourage advancement. Kind of in a dark age that lasts for 2,000 years. Oh, prime example: Warhammer 40k. They don't know how the technology works. It's not AI. It's machine spirits. When they repair things, they put purity symbols on it. It's magic.
Yeah.
Neither of us care much for Warhammer 40k. I kind of read up the lore out of kind of morbid fascination, but that's about it. He said, looking away from the camera. Yeah, I did dabble in it for a while, but GW killed my interest in it and war games in general, miniature-wise.
Yeah, GW has a tendency to do that.
Yeah, that's another thing you could do in a PC game or role-playing game, is this kind of idea of disparate technologies where you can have, sandals and scimitars and also ray guns. There we go. So anything else you want to add? We're about reaching the hour mark on our podcast here.
Well, actually, something that you mentioned just now sparked something that I forgot to mention. And when you were talking about our anachronisms, there's also the idea of magitech. Not putting magic into technology, but technology is the quote-unquote magic system for the game. Stuff like you don't summon spirits. You have like user access to a network that teleports robots.
Yeah.
You have a wand of magic missiles that goes bang bang bang.
That's another interesting trope there, where what's that saying? Sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah, that was Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So there's some examples of that as well. I think Scrap Princess is kind of like that, where it seems to be a typical magical setting, Tolkien's fantasy setting 101, but it turns out to be actually, spoiler alert, a technological backdrop where it's a lost colony and these hyper intelligent entity robot things are keeping people locked in a medieval status with using advanced technology that people think are magic. Other examples.
Yeah, I can't think of another example after that, though, sad to say.
Yeah, well, I think we're both a little burned out here, so maybe we can end the podcast here, unless there's any last words you want to throw in.
EA Cthulhu Fhtagn?
Besides the hackneyed ones.
Any last words? Okay, how about Zackle?
This has been the Daemoneye podcast, episode 12, you said? Episode 12? 12,
yeah.
Yes. Technology, Systems, and Gaming. I'm Tristan Eifler.
I'm a kidnap victim.
I was J. Tyler Burrell, and we shall catch you when we catch you.
We shall catch you and eat you.